thinking about some of the recent messages that have been delivered over the past couple of weeks. I've been thinking about that this week, and I've been asking myself, why is it that man is always so contentious? Now, for those who may not know, contentious means to be quarrelsome. It means to be argumentative, controversial, prone to a posture of debate or provoking dispute. And I was reminded of something that I was told in the very beginning of my awakening, and that is when attempting to study the scriptures, at least and especially when you are very new in attempting to understand, you should not ask why, but you should look for patterns in scripture. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I say this jokingly, but maybe not so jokingly. I feel like the word why is possibly from Hasatan. You might find that funny, but if you think about it, those of us who have children, I know at least for me, when I would instruct my children to do something and they ask me why, the first answer that would pop in my head is because I said so. That's why. But it makes me feel like the word why, when it's used, is like it's almost like a challenge to authority. And I feel like it breeds or causes contention to build up and to fester inside of us. So what causes one to ask this question? And I think it's very simple. It is our experience in the world, and sometimes it's the inability to utilize the correct filter to process the information that we encounter. Oftentimes it is what we see, hear, smell, touch, and taste that can activate and trigger our feelings and desires towards things. Now, some of us, I know I do, we often pray for Yah to use us as a light to reach those that we may encounter. So consider this. Let's look at Luke 11, and we're going to do 34 through 36. It says, the light of the body is the eye. Remember, we talked about seeing. Therefore, when thy eye is single, the whole body is also full of light. Now, in John 1, it tells us that Yahusha is life, and that life was the light of men, right? So Yahusha is the source of that light. It says, but when thine eye is evil, thy body also is full of darkness. Take heed, therefore, that the light which is in thee be not darkness. If thy whole body, therefore, be full of light, having no dark part, the whole shall be full of light. As when the bright shining of a candle doth give the light. So, if we make sure our eye is single, keep our eye on Yahusha, our whole body is full of light. He is the one that enables us to be a light. And if we look at verse 33, it tells us no man, now think of Yahusha as that man, when he hath lighted a candle, and where that candle, putteth in a secret place, neither under a bushel, but on a candlestick, that they which come in may see the light. So if we want to be a light to others, we have to make sure that our eye is single, our eye acting as that filter. And then Yahusha can use us as that light. Let's also look at Colossians 3, verse 22, and it says, servant, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing Elohim. Now, a lot of times this verse is used saying that, hey, if you have a master and you're a servant, you need to do everything that your master says. But that's not really what this is saying. It's saying, servants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh. So do what it is that he's asking you to do. We want to be obedient to our masters, but keeping in mind that we should fear Elohim. And verse 23 kind of gives us a little bit more. It says, and whatsoever ye do, so whatever you do, or whatever your master is going to have you do it heartily as to Yah and not unto men. And in these verses, it kind of makes me understand why Yahusha said that those of us that love our lives will lose it, but those of us that lose our lives for his sake, we will save our lives and live a life eternal. So anything other than losing your life for his sake is tantamount to having pride of life. And we all know that that happens because of the lust of the flesh, things that you can touch, taste, and lust of the eyes. So our experience and perception of certain things in life, it often leads us to formulate what we believe to be truths or definites, when in reality, our experiences and perception in this life is really only just a facade. Now, in the previous Matthew study, or Matthew chapter 20 study, Netanyahu, he covered the parable of the laborers and the vineyard. And if we remember, the master or the good man of the house, he went out at various hours of the day and hired laborers to work in his vineyard, some earlier in the day and some throughout and later in the day. The good man of the house agrees with the laborers who were hired earlier for a specific wage. And those that were hired throughout the day and later, he agrees to give them what is right. In the end, the good man of the house gives them all a penny. And the laborers who were hired early on begin to murmur against the good man. It's just like Israel to always murmur against the leader or the good man. Now, I don't want to teach the lesson over, but I do want to tell you that the word penny used in those verses, it is placed there to elicit a specific response. And we saw that response when Netanyahu taught it. Now, a penny as a monetary coin, it did not come into being until 790 AD, much after this was written. And that penny was made entirely of silver. Now, the wage that the good man offered and eventually paid the laborers was not only fair, it was phenomenal. The word that appears here in the original text is denarii, denarius, or denarion. And you can see that in the blue box at the top. Now, I want you to imagine that this good man of the house hired these laborers permanent. Now, if these laborers followed the biblical code and worked for the good man 6 days a week, and there are 52 weeks in a year, this means they would make 312 denarii a year. If they had weekends off, like some of us today, they would make 260 denarii a year. The point is, at this time in history, a professional soldier in the Roman army was only paid 225 denarii per year. Just something to think about the next time you see this story. This week, we're going to be covering verses 17 through 19. So this is going to be Matthew 20, verses 17 through 19. And it reads, "And Yahusha, going up to Jerusalem, took the 12 disciples apart in the way, and said unto them, Behold, we go up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man shall be betrayed unto the chief priests and unto the scribes, and they shall condemn him to death, and shall deliver him to the Gentiles to mock, and to scourge, and to crucify him. And the third day he shall rise again." Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Now, in Luke's version of this account, he mentions everything here, but he also adds that Yahusha says all things that are written by the prophets concerning the Son of Man shall be accomplished. Now, in the Bible, there are many accounts that point to the suffering that Yahusha would endure. You have Isaiah 53, Psalms 34, 22, Zechariah 12, Deuteronomy 21, and all throughout Exodus, even as early as Genesis 3. And what Aki Gadol has taught us is the proto-evangelium, or the first gospel mentioned in the Bible. Now, I have a feeling that we're going to touch on many of these chapters and verses about his suffering, a lot more in the coming Matthew study, so I'm not going to dive deep into those tonight. But I do want to look at these things that Yahusha said the Gentiles were going to do to him. First, he said they were going to mock him. And I believe we all know what mock means. It means to make sport of, to deride, to belittle, so forth and so on. And we see later on during Yahusha's passion with the centurions and the crown of thorns that they are making sport of him and belittling him. And this also takes place with the chief priests and the elders asking Yahusha to prophesy who hit him. Now, to scourge here, this means to flog or to whip. It is the Greek word mastigo, and this word is related to another Greek word, which is mastix, and it means to whip or a whip. It is the actual action of the flogging. And the root for both of these words is masaoma or masaoma. There you go. And it means to gnaw, but it is used to signify the act of handling or to squeeze. Now, I mention all of this because when we studied Exodus 29, I mentioned this then. So let's jump over to Exodus 29 for a second, and we will see that the word for unleavened is matzah, all right? And it means sweetness or a sweet bread. But if you look in the ancient Hebrew lexicon, you will see that the actual action for this is to squeeze. I just thought I'd point that out. Something you can keep in your notes. By the way, since we are here, the Hebrew word for cakes here, if you don't remember, is challah, and it means a cake, as usually punctured, or in other words, pierced, bread of life. Let's hop back to Matthew 20. And lastly, Yahusha says that they are going to crucify him. Now, I will have you know that the Romans, they did not invent crucifixion. They became masters of it, but they did not invent it. The first mentioning of a society performing crucifixion in history is actually the Assyrians at Nineveh. Unfortunately, crucifixion, it was a common practice in antiquity. Let's look at, where'd you go? Esther 5. I'm going to read verse 14. It says, Then said Zeresh, his wife, this is the wife of Haman, and all of his friends unto him, let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak thou unto the king that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then go thou in merrily with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. Now, gallows, they are platforms that you see where they used to stand a person on, and they would place a noose around the neck, and they would put a lever on a trap door in the floor, and the person would be hung. The thing is, gallows were not used until like the 15th or 16th century. So why do we see this word here? Interesting fact is that the word gallows is a Proto-Germanic word. It comes from the root word galgo, which means a pole, a stake, a rod, or a tree branch. One of the oldest complete Bibles that was created in the 3rd to 4th century, it's called the Wufilla, or the Gothic Bible, basically just a Bible translated into the Gothic language. It used the word Golga to refer to a stake or a tree in its translation, until it was forced out by the Latin Vulgate, which translated the word to crux or cross instead. Now we can confirm that the original Hebrew word used here for gallows is actually etz, which means tree. Now, Haman, he had planned to hang Mordecai on this tree. So if we look at the word for hanged here, we will see it is the Hebrew word talah, which means to suspend. And beside it, it says, especially to gibbet. Now, I'm going to assume that most people do not know what gibbeting is. So I will just tell you. Gibbeting is a device that's used to hang a person from until they are dead. The key word there is until, which means it was not immediate, like hanging. A gibbet was usually made out of a standing tree. In fact, I have a picture for you. This is the picture of a gibbet. So, what was it Haman was intending to do to Mordecai? I'll let you decide. Let's hop back over to Matthew 20. Now, crucifixion, it is the Greek word staro, and it means to impale, to extinguish. And impale is it's such a harsh, vivid word. Side note, have any of you ever heard that during the Inquisition, it was actually Negro Jews that the Spanish and Portuguese were persecuting and trying to get them to convert to Christianity? So here's another picture and a question for you. Do any of you know what this is? I will tell you. This is a torture device that was created by the Spanish and utilized to torture people during the Inquisition by impaling them. Do any of you know what the name of this device is? I'll tell you. It's called Judah's Cradle, or the Cradle of Judah. You can look that up as well in your spare time. Now, the definition for crucify, it says to impale on a cross, but if you can go further into the root word, you will see that it's really a stake or a post. And we know further from other Bible passages that Yahusha was crucified actually on a tree. Now, to impale someone, it does not always mean to penetrate through someone vertically, like our minds are trying to get us to imagine. Impale can mean to suspend or extinguish. And the idea behind it is to restrict movement. So nailing someone or something to a tree is a form of impalement. Now, people often wonder, how is it possible that Yahusha was nailed to a tree and none of his bones were broken? Well, first I would say it is possible because Yah said so. That's the main reason. But I will give you a few details that will shed light on why some things were done. Now, I mentioned that the Romans, they became masters of crucifixion. The Roman authorities, they ensured of this because the primary goal for the Romans of crucifixions was the suffering that would eventually lead to death. Now, the Roman centurion who would actually nail a person to a stake or a tree was trained to ensure that the maximum amount of suffering would occur. But he was also trained to avoid hitting major arteries and anything that would allow death to occur quicker than what they wanted. Now, Yahusha, he was not nailed through the hand, as some images depict and people may believe. And the reason being is that the hands would not be strong enough to support the weight of the body while suspended. Also, close to the center of the hand is an artery that crosses in an arc and comes down the sides of the arms. Accidentally hitting it can cause death to occur quicker. Instead, Yahusha was nailed through the wrists between the ulna and the radius bone. These bones come together at the base of the hand and are able to support the weight of the body. And your next question would probably be, okay, but what about the feet? Well, the feet were actually crossed one over the other and pointed downward and pierced individually at the base of the leg and right above the foot. Once that was done, then they would nail both of them to the stake or the tree. Now, this was done to ensure that the nail would go in between the tibia and the fibula bones. And the weight of the body pulling downward, it causes one to have trouble breathing and getting air into the lungs. The person being crucified, they would need to push up with their legs to get air back into their lungs. This would cause extreme pain as they would be pushing off the nail in their legs, eventually tiring out and subduing to the pain and expiring. Now, if the centurions wanted to hurry the process or they got tired of waiting, like with the criminals when Yahushua was crucified, they would break the legs of the individuals being crucified. This was done so they could no longer push up to get air into their lungs. Now, Yahushua, in his case, he'd already given up the Ruach before his legs could be broken. So, there are your details for those who wanted to know about how he was crucified and no bones were broken. Now, Yahushua ends this discourse in verse 19 by telling his disciples, the third day he shall rise again. So I have a question for you. How long was Yahushua in the grave? Most people would say 3 days and 3 nights. Let's look at Matthew 12:40. And it says, for as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Now, like I said, the majority of us, when asked, will tell you that Yahushua was in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. But did you know that this is the only instance where Yahushua mentions 3 days and 3 nights? So what does it mean in Matthew 20 when Yahushua says, the third day he shall rise again? You don't have to answer that question. Now, I've had this conversation with at least some of the Akim before, but I began to realize at a young age something about myself and other people. And that is that we have been lied to so much that a lot of times we view everything with skepticism. And possibly this is rightfully so. But it often leads us to miss out on the things that are right in front of our faces. You see, the adversary is not a fool. And a lot of times we are told the truth about a thing just so we will view it as a lie. So we go through life believing it is a lie, just to realize in the end that it was actually the truth, and vice versa as well. There are many factors at play when trying to figure out biblical things, especially for us. There's language that needs to be sorted out. There's context. There's motivations behind translations and transliterations. There's motivations behind characters, history, so forth and so on. All of this has to be taken into account. Let's go back to Exodus for a sec, and let's check something out. Let's look at Exodus 19, 1. It says, in the third month, when the children of Yasharel were gone forth out of the land of Mitzrayim, the same day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. What numerical day of the month is this? Let me give you a hint. Let's look at the reverse interlinear. It says, in the third month, on the same day of the month that the Israelites had left the land of Mitzrayim, they came to the wilderness of Sinai. Torah Aki, it is the 15th. Anything significant about the 15th? It is the Shabbat. Do you ever realize that the Shabbat lands on the 15th day of the month for 3 months straight? That's not my message for today, but I just want you to know that. So we have established that the day they arrived is the 15th, and it is a Shabbat. Now, Moshe, he goes up to talk to Yah, and in verse 10 and 11, it says, and Yah said unto Moshe, go unto the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and be ready against the third day. For the third day, Yah will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. So let me ask you a question. What numerical day is the third day here? So they arrived on the 15th, and Yah tells them to be ready against the third day. All right. So we got 18, we got 17. So let's see. I did this before when I covered this chapter in the Exodus study, which some of you may not have been here for. The word third in Hebrew, it is shlishi. And it means third as in rank, order, or part. Now, the word for three in Hebrew, it is different. It is shalosh or shalosh. And we can see that word in Genesis 40, 12 through 13. It says, and Joseph said unto him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head and restore thee unto thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, in the former manner when thou was his butler. And we can see that 3 here, when I click on it, it is shalosh. And shalosh means 3, third, or thrice, as in the sense of counting 3. So back in Exodus 19:11, I ask you again, what numerical day is this? And you don't have to answer because we already did. But let us consider this. We agreed that they arrived on the 15th, which was the Shabbat. And I know Yirmiyahu is familiar with this. But let me show you another picture. These are the Hebrew days of the week. You have Yom Rishon, Yom Shini, Yom Shlishi, Yom Revi, Yom Hamashi, Yom Shishi, Yom Shabbat. So if they arrived on the 15th, which we said was the Shabbat, which day is the third day? Yom Shlishi. There we go. Let's look at another example. Let's go to 1 Samuel, and we're going to do 20. I know somebody who likes this chapter. Verses 4 and 5, it says, Then said Jonathan unto David, Whatsoever thy soul desireth, I will even do it for thee. And David said unto Jonathan, Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at meat. But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field until the third day at even. So how many days was David hiding in the field? Anyone? Don't worry. I would say 3. But the word used here is Yom Shlishi, just like we saw in Exodus. Now, I will tell you that in this instance, it's a little bit different, and it takes a lot more to consider and figure out. But that is another lesson for another day. So back in Matthew 20:19, and there's a reason I did all this. What does Yahusha mean when he says the third day he shall rise again? I can tell you that there are 15 instances in the New Testament where the third day is mentioned in relation to Yahusha's death, his burial, and his resurrection. 13 of those instances are in the Gospels. And the other 2 that are mentioned is once by Kepha or Peter and once by Shaul or Paul. And it is in relation to explanations or them explaining to people about Yahusha's death, burial, and resurrection. So what do I think? Well, I will say this. I would say that we should all examine very carefully what it is and why we are asking what we are asking. What I am saying is that we, myself included, spend so much time trying to calculate how long he was in the grave and when he died that we overlook the most important part. He rose again. Hebrews 9:27 tells us that it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this, the judgment. So we all know that we're going to die. We all know that Yahusha had to die. But if Yahusha is not resurrected, then there would be absolutely no hope for us at all. Let's look at 1 Corinthians 15, and we're going to do 12 through 14. It says, Now if Mashiach be preached that he rose from the dead, how say some among you that there is no resurrection of the dead? But if there be no resurrection of the dead, then is Mashiach not risen? And if Mashiach be not risen, then our preach in vain. And your belief, your hope, your trust, that also is in vain. 21 through 26, it says, For since by man came death, by man came also the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all died, even so in Mashiach shall all be made alive. But every man in his own order. Mashiach the first fruits, afterward they that are Mashiachs at his coming. Then cometh the end, when he shall have delivered up the kingdom to Elohim, even the Father, when he shall have put down all rule and all authority and power. That's a nugget for someone who knows. I bet you Netanyahu's got that one earmarked in his Bible. For he must reign till he hath put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. Let's also look at 1 Peter 1, and we're going to do 3 through 5. It says, Blessed be the Elohim and Father of our Master Yahushua HaMashiach, which according to his abundant mercy hath begotten us again unto a lively hope by the resurrection of Yahushua HaMashiach from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled, and that fadeth not away, preserved in Shamayim for you, who are kept by the power of Elohim through faith unto salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time. Something I used to say a long time ago that I haven't said in a while. Don't get distracted by the shiny object. If you think about it, there's this thing, I believe it's Catholic, where they talk about, if I'm not mistaken, don't quote me, that when they're doing their communion, that they're crucifying Mashiach anew. And I think I'd have to look it up, but I think there's some discourse where the Pope says that, not just one time to crucify him, but 1,000 times. When we're trying to figure out how long he was in the grave, or how long he was dead for, or when he died, that's not the important part. We knew that that was going to happen. The Bible tells us that's going to happen. The important part is that he rose again. And that resurrection is what gives us hope. His whole life in general gives us hope, but the resurrection shows us that we will rise again as well.